right, looks like we're live on Facebook. Welcome, everyone. All right, so tonight's topic is we're going to talk about keeping our commitments. And I don't know about you, but there's been times where I've been really good at this, and then other times I haven't been so good at that. And that usually leads to a lot of self criticism and beating up on myself, all that kind of stuff. Have you guys experienced this of times where you're good at keeping your commitments and then other times you're terrible at them, right? So we're going to talk a little bit of how that ties into sometimes it is a trauma response or learned behaviors from being in abusive situations, and then how to recognize those signs, what to do about those, and then how to move through those. Okay. And I also want to share a good insight that I got today because I was doing a ton of overthinking. A ton of overthinking. So, and that happens when I watch some YouTube videos where they kind of activate some ideas of different things that I hadn't thought of before. So, and then it kind of takes me down this whole different plane. So, it can be a good thing because sometimes I can all of a sudden get an aha moment, an awareness. An idea that I hadn't quite thought of before. And sometimes that can come from watching completely unrelated topics. So we'll save that for another time. But so tonight is around keeping your commitments. And so the big insight that I had regarding this was that I found that when I was doing the overthinking, I realized that the commitments that I was able to keep and follow through on and stick with are the ones that were truly from me. The ones where I wavered, where I wasn't as consistent, I found that those commitments or promises that I had made were more for somebody else. And that so don't get me wrong here. Let me explain. So I'm really good at keeping commitments of things like, hey, I need you to be here at this time. This is an important event. I understand why it's important, and for sure I will be there, right? That I don't want to let others down, especially if I'm part of a team. Definitely will follow through on those kind of things. Um, I am more likely to back out on a commitment if it's just solely for me. And I know that seems to contradict what I just said, but if these are things where I am making a commitment because I think somebody else wants me to achieve a certain thing, then sometimes I will fall into the trap of saying yes when I really mean no. And I am aware of that, but that comes from my past in childhood of where learned to say yes to things that I didn't want to say yes to because that was part of the abuser's training and teaching, and um, there were consequences if I didn't comply. If I said what I really wanted, then I wasn't allowed that, and I was tried to always controlled into what they wanted. So what I learned from that experience was I learned just to say yes because that was more efficient. Because I knew if I tried to go the route that I wanted or do the things that I wanted, I was just going to get manipulated into going back and doing what they wanted anyway. So I got to the point when that happens over a repeated period of time, you end up getting to the point where you have this, stage 4, where you're in this fear where it doesn't matter what you do, you will end up just complying to with whatever they say. And so learning to overcome these kind of things is something that is really important, and recognizing the difference of when you're saying yes for something that you truly want, compared to saying yes when you're either trying to fit in, trying to be part of a social group. You know that they respect these things. Katie! ah, all day, so quiet. Then all of a sudden, I come on here. She wants to sing. Maybe she thinks I'm singing. I don't know. Or maybe she's just. Okay. So that because I've done things where I will say yes to be part of a social group or things like that, and I think this is something that's fairly normal that we will pick up and never underestimate the power of influence. The people that you hang around are the people that you end up becoming like, and they do have an influence on you. And I think some of that is wired into our DNA regarding social cues and being able to survive as a pack, right? And this came up because somebody was talking the other day about how when they just wanted to be alone and have some quiet time to listen to their stuff and when they were on their lunch break and but then a bunch of other people showed up and had those social interactions, right? So you can't just sit by yourself and read quietly and stuff like that. And I can remember that because there were times where I was working in a very social environment and um, we would always get together. We had this routine and we just kind of went through this routine. And there were some times that I really just wanted to kind of go off and be by myself and go and read, but I also didn't want to break the cues and the social norms. So sometimes I would commit to say, doing certain things, and these are obviously small commitments, not long commitments, right? But I would say yes to things that I really wanted to say no to, and I would sacrifice what I wanted for the good of the group. And that is kind of how I operated. So part of the healing process for me, it's can be extremely uncomfortable because now I have to learn to say no, where my default automatic response that sometimes kicks in before I realize what's going on and I haven't checked in with myself, and I will say yes to things, and I really didn't want to, but I also didn't want to upset other people, and that is definitely conditioning received from childhood trauma, right? So, and I think this would be a good time. I know I just kind of jumped into the topic and I wanted to make sure that we were on track with that. But for those of you that are just jumping in the first time and maybe you haven't seen me before, my name is Tina. I am a happiness coach and I help people with feelings of depression and anxiety and frustrations and all of those, you know, less fun emotions, and I help you shift those so that you can get to a happier place. And I do this, I share my personal experience, strength, and hope. And for those of you that don't know, I have I've come from a background where if you take the ACEs test, which is Adverse Childhood Experiences, I get a 10 out of 10 on the test. That is not a test that you want to get a 10 out of 10 on. And basically, it means that your childhood has been impacted by adverse conditions and experiences, and that can be anything from physical abuse, neglect, other family members watching them get abused, and it can also be, things like sexual abuse, and that happened for me. And so sometimes I will share my experience, strength, and hope, and I will also share the recovery skill sets that I've learned and the tools that I've learned along the way, because this applies not only for people who've experienced that kind of trauma, but this has helped me when I was in my corporate environment and I was involved in a lot of change management. So you will see me bring a couple of things to the table of trauma informed kind of coaching and also change management kind of coaching as well to help you be able to transition. Um, so um, saying yes when you really mean no is one of the things. And this isn't just important for you personally if you fall into that. Maybe you're like, well, Tina, I say no when I mean no. And I know how to set boundaries. I know all that stuff, blah, blah, blah. What you don't realize is that some of the people that you are dealing with, maybe somebody on your team, maybe one of your customers, one of your vendors, and you think that they operate at that same high level as you, and then you get really pissed off and frustrated when you didn't realize and you didn't recognize some of the cues or ways that you delivered the request that ended up causing somebody to say yes when they knew that they couldn't possibly deliver on that expectation. They couldn't meet that commitment, but out of their fear or undealt with trauma, they will tell you things that aren't true. Some will directly lie to you and tell you things. Some they don't do it intentionally. They really believe that they can do that and they really want to please or service the contract or whatever it is, and yet they end up falling short of the ideal. And a lot of times people end up dealing with that with like really harsh criticism and stuff like that. They don't recognize any of the warning signs up front, so they end up not being able to mitigate some of these challenges. And that I think was one of the core strengths that I had, is that because I could recognize these things and I could sense that maybe they weren't going to follow through. And so a lot of times I would add in extra layers to make sure that things were on track, which made me a great project manager. It made me great at being able to negotiate and being able to follow up and follow through and all those kind of things. So just because you have been through past trauma doesn't mean you can't learn to use those skills to your advantage. And so I'm not here to kind of go down the path of, oh, I have been traumatized and therefore I must stay this exact same way and there's nothing I can do about it. I am not of that kind of mindset. In fact, most of the time I haven't actually talked about what I've been through and what I've experienced, because the last thing I ever wanted to be viewed as was a victim or somebody that needed help, right? Um, because that in and of itself, in being able to accept any help, because that was one of the tactics that my abuser would use, is they would put me into a position of being so desperate for their attention, for anybody's attention, because as a child you need attention, you need love, guidance, support, kindness, interaction with adults. You need that kind of stuff. And if you get ostracized, you get criticized and isolated, and that is part of their tactic to be able to gain control over you and to silence you as well. Um, those are things that you become very in tune with, you become very sensitive to, you understand when it's being done, and sometimes that'll cause you to pull back. I know it does for me, but recognizing some of these signs of what has been going on, of at least knowing when I am saying yes when I really mean no. And one of the ways that I learned to circumvent that issue is that every time that I caught myself doing it, it didn't matter if I had already said yes and I already made the commitment and I did that thing, I would force myself to go back and renegotiate. And that was the most uncomfortable thing. And it always felt like, people were upset with me because it's like, oh, you're backing out on your commitment. And that was, oh, thank you so much, FNA. Um, so backing out on that commitment was part of the thing that I had to do, because I was so worried about sticking with a commitment and staying with things, that I had to learn to um, force myself to go through that discomfort of backing out, not meeting my commitment, but telling somebody up front as soon as I recognized that I said a yes when I meant no. And the more I did that, the less I it became more consciously aware of that before I would say that yes. I would request additional time so that I didn't make a rash decision. I didn't make an impulsive judgment because my natural default setting is I want to please, I want to say yes, I want to help other people. And this led me to the second reason of why I would often fall down on the commitments is I would overpromise because I want to help so many people. So sometimes these defects of character, these shortcomings don't come from a bad place. And when you start to do the inner work and you see that, because sometimes we can get so caught up in beating up on ourselves. It's like, oh, I didn't do it again. I suck. I'm a loser. Blah blah blah. Whatever that negative word track that you've learned to beat yourself up with. Um, when those things come up, it's a matter of starting to look at it's like, okay, when did this problem start to happen? How did it start to come up? How did I get into a situation where I've now overpromised and I can't do all of the things? Now, sometimes those stretch goals were good and I did, challenge myself to grow. So there's a little bit of a balancing act. So sometimes you do need to say yes when you're like, "Oh, I'm too scared. I want to say no." And sometimes you have to force yourself to say yes in those situations where it's uncomfortable, but really learning to know the difference of is it that I'm afraid and I don't think I can do it, or is it, you know what, I am just saying yes because I don't want them to be upset with me. There's a big difference of when you're saying yes and why you're saying yes to things. And this is really important when you're keeping your commitments. And if you find that is something that's important to you, then you're going to want to be able to start looking at these reasons of if you found yourself in a situation where you have overpromised and now you can't actually deliver on those promises, that can be something that is really uncomfortable. But sitting with that discomfort, sitting with those uncomfortable emotions and looking at it and understanding, okay, why did I do this? Well, maybe at the time of the first thing that you said yes to, you didn't know about this other thing that was coming up. And rather than when this other important thing came up as well, and you're like, well, shit, I actually do have to do this one. And so you say yes to that as well. And now you end up having to choose between these. It's like, okay, well, I can't do both. So now I have to weigh out and understanding what the variables are in that situation of how, is this something that has to be done now? Is this something like now you have to go through like prioritizing and what can wait, what is more important than the other thing, and how do you do that stuff if you can't do both? Now, sometimes you can push yourself and you can find a way in by asking yourself the question of how can I do both? How can I make this work? What kind of things would I need to change or put in place in order for both of these things to work? And that can work when you only have two things. But if you've gone and overcommitted on a bunch of different things, and now you're like the dog that had that really long leash and has now wrapped himself up and got himself caught in the tree. Now you're kind of stuck and now you need some help getting out of that. And that sometimes means you have to eat a piece of humble pie and go back and say, you know what? I wasn't paying attention. Like, take full ownership of it. Don't blame it on somebody else. Don't try to, you know, check and see. I really hate those people that do that. They're like, well, like, so like what are you doing like next week? And if you say nothing, oh, okay, well, can we just move this over to this day instead since you don't really have anything planned? It's like that really feels like a manipulation rather than coming out and saying, you know what, I overbooked. I took on too many things and I've got to really juggle these other things that are really important. I know your stuff is important too. Here's some potential solutions. Maybe it's somebody else on the team that you can delegate that task to. Maybe it is something along the lines of being able to understand, um, can this wait? Or, you know what, we need to either reprioritize this, or if this is urgent, what is the information that maybe they can tell you another piece of information that you weren't aware of why this actually has to happen. And sometimes I've had this in situations too, where sometimes maybe you forgot about that maybe this project is important piece for another project that's even bigger that is hinging on the results of this. So when so sometimes, and I've had to remind managers and stuff like that, it's like, hey, actually we need to get this done for this Friday because of these reasons, and if not, this is the consequence that's going to happen if we push this out. And reminding people of, oh shoot, okay, right. Um, so I thought this was the more important thing, but actually this has a bigger cost implication if we don't get these things done, or we won't be able to move forward with this other thing if we don't get these things done. So sometimes you have to go back and renegotiate and reprioritize some of the challenges, and this happens a lot in change management. You can have a bunch of great ideas, get going brainstorming, identifying all these problems, putting action plans into place, and then we end up sometimes overcommitting, or the timelines need to be tweaked a bit and renegotiated. So understanding, so the conflicts and overpromising can happen as well. So conflicts are maybe you had the timing down, you had the commitment, but now you can't keep the commitment because maybe there were conflicts that happened. Maybe those were conflicts on your own personal calendar, something else came up that you now have to stop what you're doing to do this. That could be personal, professional. Maybe you had a bunch of people out sick. Maybe the timelines didn't get met. But understanding that the communication is going to be key at that piece of, if there is a situation where you truly can't meet that commitment, or there's a problem that was either unforeseen, something happened, being able to properly communicate that, or if you see a potential problem coming up, make sure you communicate in advance as much as possible, identifying, hey, these are some challenges that we're seeing. We think we can still hit the date, but I wanted to make you aware because these things could cause a potential delay. And I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but preemptively communicating, letting somebody know, hey, there are these challenges that are here that could arise, but we think we're pushing as hard as we can to make sure that we meet the deadline. Identifying that, communicating ahead of time is going to make somebody a whole lot happier, knowing that you are working towards things, that you are thinking about things, you are conscientious about keeping the commitment, and you're doing everything in your power. But if it falls through, or it gets to the point where it's always good to leave a timeline too, to say, you know what, the deadline is Friday. We do have these challenges. It's making it look a little bit tighter than we thought, but I'm going to give you an update by Wednesday to let you know where we're at and to let you know whether or not we might have to push this date. Katie. uh, yes. Why are you running around yelling? Come here. This is the culprit. Katie. So I know I was kind of slipping into a bit more of a business talk, but this does tie into, depending on what kind of environment you grew up in and what kind of business environments you've been in, these behaviors may not have been allowed, may not have been tolerated. Openly admitting that you might miss a deadline, it's like, no, you're just going to cause fear and all of that kind of stuff. I've had managers like that, but I can promise you that everybody that I have ever worked with, that I had a good business rapport, we were good business partners, whether that was a customer, a vendor, one of our clients, whatever it is, when I communicated, and I usually over communicate to let people know this is where we're at with the project, this is what's happening with it, this is the potentials where we could have problems because I'm trying to prevent unhappiness, right? I want them to be happy, I want them to be aware, I want them to be informed, because there is nothing that will destroy a relationship faster, especially in business, if you continue to say you're going to do something and then don't do it. And now, being able to address those things in a proper way is going to be able to save the relationship and potentially get you the results that you're looking for if you address this in a proper way. If you address this in the, fuck you attitude, you said you were going to do this, I'm holding you accountable, blah, 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 that doesn't help anybody, right? You might, out of fear, get a better response, or they're going to rush and give you push the results through, but then you're going to have to deal with challenges. Now, if they communicate ahead of time and understand, it's like, okay, if we push this through, let me know what challenges you think that might be the fallout for this. And then at least then you're able to understand what the potential risk and rewards are. Is it good enough to continue to have that project deliver on time, even though that there are going to be certain things that fall through the cracks? And that there's going to be additional problems that we're going to have to clean up afterwards. Is that good enough to continue on and hit the deadline, even though it's going to be messy, even though it's going to not be a nice finished product, but it's going to be good enough, and then we can do patches afterwards? Or is this, if we try to rush this through, is it going to completely break everything and going to cause us to look terrible, right? We don't want to do this. We don't want to force those things through. And then that may mean, okay, so what do we need to do? Do we need additional resources that we need to pull in to be able to still be able to execute this? What do I need to pull off of your plate so that we can get this done in the time frame? Who else do we need to involve so that we can get the information? And that's where you start working together to solve the problems and honor the commitment, and get that done. Or you might go, okay, doesn't look like we're able to get this done on the time frame, so we're going to set a new target date, and this is what it's going to be. These are the things that we're going to do so that we don't have to reset that target date again, and who assign who needs to do what. So all of these things that I just talked about, of being able to find out who else can you bring on to the project, who else can you pull off of the project, what other resources do you need to get things done in that time frame. And those are important things to address, whether you're trying to hit the original target date or you're moving the target date, because the last thing you want is to move the target date and still not address some of the issues that caused the delay in the first place. So really understanding the root cause and corrective action is important to be able to make sure that people are able to keep their commitments. So that is much more of the project management, the change management side of things, and that's really good. But where you will have problems is being unaware of people's past traumas, whether that is their childhood stuff or their past work environment traumas that they've been through, that maybe they don't want to say that they're not going to get it done on time because maybe they were in an abusive environment, that if they didn't If they weren't on time, then they were punished. And for them, it's the fear of God itself that, oh no, I can't say that I can't get it done. And so they're not going to be honest with you. They're going to hide things. They're not going to be open about it. And then what will usually happen when the project fails is they're going to start blaming other people. And this causes so much unnecessary conflict in the workplace. So creating an environment where people are actually open to talk about what is going on and to be honest about it. And yes, you can hold them accountable, but not in the traditional way that um, that people normally do. It's like, well, you said that you were going to do this. That's kind of like a blame. Don't come off in that kind of energy. Come off with asking questions, asking them things like, okay, so do you understand the importance of this? Is there anything, do you think, coming up that could potentially delay you from being able to get this? Maybe they're like, yeah, I've been waiting for this other report. They're telling me that I'm supposed to be able to get it by this date, but I don't think I can get it by this date. Okay, what can I do? Do I need to go talk to the manager of that department? Do I need to provide anything to them? Do I need to sign off on anything? Whatever it is that you need for the particular process, understanding that. And because always assume positive intent, that people on your team, they actually want to do a good job. They actually want to honor their commitments. So if they are not honoring their commitments, or it looks like they might not honor their commitments, understanding what is the thing that is causing the fear for them. Why are they not able to do this, not wanting to do this? Because I think if people have everything that they need, they will actually move forward with it. They will do the right thing. So as a leader, it's important to be able to remove any obstacles. And this is the same thing that we have when we're doing inner work. This is There's love and there's fear. Fear is false evidence appearing real. So this is very much a binary um, computer programming kind of way of looking at it. This isn't like crunchy granola woo woo stuff. Right? This is okay. Love is all of the good things. That is somebody who honors their commitments. They do the things that they need to do. They're a great team player. They're open. They're communicative. They are somebody you can count on. They create a safe place. You create a safe place. It's open. It's uh, expansive and creative and problem solving and progress and growth, and it's all these wonderful things that you want that energy. Everything else is roadblocks to that. And so being able to remove those roadblocks and clear the path, because people want to move down that path. They want to be able to succeed. And so when we focus on removing any of those roadblocks, any of those challenges, and whether that is, now I know in business we typically only focus on the tangible roadblocks, right? Um, Systems, I've given you the right system, I've given you the procedure, I've given you the tools, and so you just need to do the thing, right? What often doesn't get addressed in the business environment is the emotional side of it. What are the hesitations? What are the fears that are coming up for people? Maybe somebody doesn't want to talk to another manager because every time they go talk to that guy, he criticizes them, puts them down, never prioritizes them, makes them feel like shit, whatever it is, and they do it maybe in a subtle way, right? Or maybe somebody is just like, they don't open up, so they don't say what it is they need, and if they don't speak about it, then you can't solve that problem, right? So sometimes people will hold things all to their chest because if I give this information out, then they're gonna, you know, or it's not ready. Maybe they're a perfectionist, right? And they're holding it back because it's not ready, and if it's not perfect, being able to create a safe environment that somebody is willing to show the imperfect work, because that's just normal. That's just part of the process, and it's not a punishing thing. And you can give guidance, encouragement, and that kind of stuff, right? If that's just a normal thing, then they're going to be much more open to it, right? Um, sometimes, sometimes this happens too. Seen this in environments. The person knows how to do the task. They know what to do. They know how to do it. They know who they need to interact with to get it done. But they also might know some other information that they heard through the grapevine, or somebody else whispered. Now, this could be true. This could be false. These are things that maybe create fears, right? And so now the person, even though they know what to do, they have all the tools they need to do it, but now they're uncertain. Maybe it's a conflict of like, okay, well, which one of these two? Because I've had that where I was put in a position where the president of the company told me to do one thing. The VP of sales came along and gave me a completely contradicting, complete opposite from what the president wanted. I hesitated in the response. He took that as insubordination. And then there was this whole big kerfuffle that ended up happening. So, those kind of things can end up happening, and that could cause somebody to not meet their commitment. So, there's a lot of variables and reasons as to why somebody might not meet their commitment. And it's when they feel a personal attachment to the commitment, that commitment aligns with their core values of who they are, and it doesn't threaten their safety, then they are much more likely to follow through with that commitment. And if it's not, if there's a little bit of wiggle room on that, of understanding. So, example, um, I said every day I'm coming on, I'm doing a live, and yes, I've had some time challenges, but I've still followed through on the commitment of showing up every day. So maybe I didn't do the full commitment. Originally, I started at 9 p.m., then I changed it to 11, and tonight I started at like 12:30. So those are things, but I still followed through with the commitment of coming on and doing a live every day. What I need to tighten up on is time. And speaking of that, next week I will be playing around with the different times. I'm going to be experimenting. So I will be all over the road of what times I'm going to do my lives next week. So what you're going to want to do, if you found this valuable, you're going to want to go to my YouTube channel, Coach Tina B 125, click on the subscribe button and make sure so that you get notified when the videos, because I upload the live videos on there, and I'll also be posting when I'm actually going to be going live. Okay, um, so so if you're not following me on Facebook, make sure that you're checking out Facebook um, as well. So I will be posting on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. Although I haven't been doing much with the lives on Instagram, eventually I'll get to the point where I'm kind of doing a bunch of these different things. But I'm going to be changing some things up and trying some new things next week. Um, and you'll have to let me know if you like those better, and what that's going to look like. So, guys, with that, I'm going to wrap this up for tonight. I hope this helped give you some insights as to why you or the people around you might not be following through on their commitments, and how you can actually start to mitigate those challenges, avoid those problems, and have people follow through in a way where they don't feel beaten into submission, into following through on their commitments. Because the truth is somebody when they commit to something, they actually want to follow through. But then there are things that end up coming up that prevent us from doing that. Getting to the root and understanding why somebody is not following through on something and removing the fear, removing the blocks, gets them into that place of love, energy, and they will move forward. Okay? So, guys, with that, I hope you found it helpful. We'll talk to you again tomorrow night. Have a great night. Bye.